Like, I openly talk with my teams about uncertainty. I remind them that we rarely get 100% before we need to act. And this 70% rule, like, move when you have enough information to make a good decision and then adjust.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of As Unexpected. I'm your host, Scott Marshall, and today we have a person who in so many ways has defined and continues to define what it means to be in community. And if you've listened to any of the other podcasts that I've done with other guests, you know that I really view community as the source of resilience for any neighborhood, any nation, any world, that community is so important. But I'm not going to go on anymore. I'm just going to introduce Laura. Laura, thank you so much. I know you're under the weather, and I so appreciate you showing up today for this recording. Thank you for being here.
Very happy to be here. Frog in my throat and all. We were just catching up over the fact that we have our tea, so forgive me with the sniffing. I have my whole accoutrement set up. I have Kleenex, I have cough drops, but when I woke up this morning, you and I have been trying to do this for a while, and I have been the obnoxious one, rescheduling and rescheduling and rescheduling. And when I woke up this morning, I was like, what is like, who is against us here? It's very appropriate that the As Unexpected podcast continues to get delayed by unexpected life events such as getting sick. So here we are. My kids all went back to school this week, and I got hit with it.
Yeah. So happens so often with parents with young kids. We swim in the same cesspool as a consequence. Well, thank you. Thank you for toughing it out and making sure we didn't have to unexpectedly, or maybe in this case, expectedly reschedule yet again.
Reschedule, I think, as my pattern of behavior has demonstrated.
Yes. Well, Laura, thanks again for being here. Currently the Vice President of Community at Reddit. What a cool position. What a cool community. If you could give our audience just a bit of a background on yourself and what led into your current role, I think that it would be really important.
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, I've had the word community in my job description for over 20 years now. And the thing that's been the same is I say it and people are like, that's awesome. What is it? What do you do? What does that mean? So I'm happy to go into it. I think, at its core, I as a human have always held a really deep curiosity for people and an enjoyment of identifying what makes them unique and what motivates them. And, we all have very similar core motivations, but they stem from different places. I love people. And the easiest way I can describe what I do is I help organizations build communities that power their growth, but also add value back to the community itself. So what that means is that I can unlock the motivations of the most passionate users of that service. So in my personal example, that's been Yelp, that's been Duolingo, that's been Reddit. And when you find those motivations, they're generally very intrinsic, right? People want autonomy, or they want mastery, or they want purpose in something bigger than themselves. And generally, when you identify people that are so passionate about that service, there's an overlap in value add. So in Yelp's example, people were passionate about finding new, unknown local businesses and writing about them and telling people about them. And the value that added to Yelp was that they then could create a platform where they could surface reviews. But it was mutually beneficial because these users wanted to find the places and tell people about the places. And so in Duolingo's case as well, there were users. What people don't know about Duolingo is that up until recently, all of the courses were built and maintained by teams of volunteers. And it's just a really incredible model where people who are passionate about language or want to preserve um, something that is really meaningful to them, almost like a sociolinguistic time capsule, like a potentially extinct language, they could create it and put it on Duolingo. And then that also serves back um, to the platform itself and to then the millions of people that consume it. So that is a high level of what I do. As for how I got into it, that's a bit of a deeper question. Um, Again, I started by saying I have this deep curiosity for people. And I learned really young that I could rally people together and combine their unique passions and interests into something bigger than any of their individual parts. And this family lore that I've had for a long time is when I was 6, I asked for a globe and a subscription to National Geographic magazine because I get a ton of satisfaction from meeting and learning and unlocking secrets about different people, what motivates them and how are they approaching things differently. And how can someone have a passion like soccer, which looks like everything is the same, or football, but one person wants to be a goalkeeper and the other person wants to go and score all the goals. And the other person just wants to run around the whole time and serve other people. The same thing could be said of like an orchestra. And you're unable to unlock these unique and nuanced motivations and niche traits that make people so complex and intricate and different and interesting. And that's what community is at its core, right? It's people who are very different coming together, bound by shared values around one particular interest. And I believe it's a fundamental human need, not just a buzzword at this point.
There's so many pieces we could take from that explanation of your background and your definition of community and your fascination with the world and people. If we could just take it into this role of community, where in many ways you hear conversations around threat to community. The online tools are making people more isolated, more in bubbles. People are spending more time staring at their little, whatever, 5x3.5 or whatever it is, size phone they have. And yet you are really trying to enable community within that ecosystem of technology. How do you balance those ideas that you are trying to enable community and in some ways maybe define it differently from other people's maybe more traditional view of what community is?
And one thing I think it's important to realize is that people's passions and interests are really what drive them, but oftentimes those aren't accessible in the school they go to, or maybe the family they were born into, or their own culture, or belief structure or system. One thing that I think that is really empowering about, online platforms, Reddit in particular, is it allows for communities to be accessible in a way that they never were before. One of the things I grappled with in the beginning was on Reddit in particular, again, there's privacy is a right. And so we call it pseudonymity, but you can share who you are, or you don't have to share who you are. And I think that initially I was a bit concerned that would lead to questionable behaviors. I actually have found it to be the exact opposite. So like on LinkedIn, for example, if you go and you see, I am Laura Nestler and I am humbled and honored to be da 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 da, and here's all my accolades. And on a place like Reddit, I'm like, hey, my kid has this rash, you know, here's how big the bumps are. And like, here's where we went hiking last weekend. And all of these people are willing to share so much more authentically and so much more openly. And I believe that, again, I think that people are seeking community on a much deeper level than surface. And so when we provide people with access to to really unlocking who they are and getting curious about other people, uh, and exploring some interests or passions that they just might not have access to. I actually believe that that is a more empowering experience and a more fulfilling experience than maybe people give it credit for.
Yeah, actually, I love that definition. And I have to first state I nor the podcast nor my organization is sponsored by Reddit. But I will say, having moved to Colorado 8 years ago, I remain a very devoted Portland Timbers fan.
Oh, I see.
And my way of really following what's going on is certainly not on LinkedIn, is not on MLS.com, but is on Reddit,
Yeah.
where the fans are paying so much more attention than I have the time or energy to, but I get to go there and find that information. I don't have fellow Timbers fans in my neighborhood.
Right.
I bet you there are very few in the town I live in. So you're spot on that I get to stay connected to a community that matters when I live many states away. I think it's a fine example. Thank you for that. So with that, Laura, the heart and soul of this podcast is as unexpected, how we show up for others and ourselves when things go as unexpected. And I'm guessing through your time with Yelp and Duolingo and now with Reddit, you've had a few unexpected moments and you've been tested in how you need to show up for yourself and others. Are there a few examples that you're willing to share? Or let's start off with one.
Too many examples. I think I'm actually going to go back to how we initially met, which is through semester at sea. I went on to your point again. I'm not here because of semester at sea, but it links us both. We are of the semester at sea community, and I went on the voyage in spring of 2003. Now, there is never like a normal time. We all love to say like, oh, things used to be normal. Things have never been normal. I think we have some revisionist history. But spring of 2003 was a unique voyage in that while we were on the ship, the one of the Iraq wars broke out and bird flu started spreading through Asia. And so after we left India, we were meant to go on, I believe, to Vietnam. But I'm not exactly sure because it was a long time ago and we didn't actually go. So we just floated, literally floated. A ship full of students and professors and crew. And I remember during that time, they would just come on and be like, we don't know where we're going. We're not sure yet, because after Vietnam, it was meant to be, I believe, Hong Kong, which also was a place that we couldn't go for safety. And so we all were just waiting to see where we would end up. And there was no playbook and there was no certainty and there was no plan. And that drove some people crazy, of course, right? But looking back, that experience for me feels so indicative of leadership and life in general that you can plan everything. Like we had the whole voyage planned to the day and the minute, and you have everything ready. You have all your plans set. You and I scheduled this podcast however many times we've done that. And then the unexpected happens. And, in that, I'll just extrapolate the learning from it, because there are tens of thousands of examples, but your job in that moment is not to cling to the original plan. Your job in that moment is not to say, you know what a leader does? A leader pulls into Vietnam and all these people get bird flu. Your job in that moment is to stay calm and to keep people grounded and help move everyone forward together. And I think that what I take away from that is that good leadership is normalizing ambiguity, right? Handling it well, adapting, holding space for uncertainty, and keeping your team or your family or a ship full of college students focused on what you can control. Because you will never have 100% of the answers. And waiting for total certainty, we would still be floating. If we were waiting for total certainty, we would be out there 20 years later waiting for a port. But I learned something. I learned something on the ship that I took with me, which is the 70% rule. I don't know if you've heard this, but it's move when you have enough clarity to act at about 70%, right? Trust your judgment, adapt as you go. And sometimes you do have to float around for a little bit until that next step kind of reveals itself. But as long as you have about 70% certainty, okay, move forward with that.
And as you are moving in a situation, so again, when your professional experience, as you suddenly are at 10% uncertainty and you can't move, or 10% certainty and you can't move, and it suddenly gets to 20 and 30 and 40, so you're still not moving, but you're getting more certain. How are you presenting yourself to your team in those times?
I mean, yeah, that's where values come in, right? When you know what matters most, your values become your guidepost, and they help you make decisions when all the information's incomplete. So I think the best way to prepare people for the unexpected is to make, maybe let's say, adaptability a part of the culture. That is just normalized. It's not something that just happens in a crisis. I think you can do that in a few ways. I think first, you can set very clear values and priorities. So when people know what matters most, they have a guidepost when things go sideways. So in Semester at Sea's case, like keeping people healthy was the value. And so you know that you're not going to make a, wackadoodle decision and pull into a port where people are going to be unsafe or unhealthy. And even if that path changes, the why stays the same. Okay, what port can we go to where that value of keeping people safe and healthy is applied? It keeps everyone, sorry, forgive the metaphor, but it keeps everyone anchored.
Yeah, 100% though, 100%.
Yeah, I think the other one, I said it a couple times now, I think it's normalizing ambiguity. Like I openly talk with my teams about uncertainty. I remind them that we rarely get 100% before we need to act. And this 70% rule, like move when you have enough information to make a good decision and then adjust. It builds this muscle memory for acting without overthinking and getting into that like analysis paralysis where you can talk yourself out of any decision with enough data and time. So I think the last one is psychological safety. So again, back to the Semester at Sea example, I mean, Lord knows that had to make a lot of parents nervous. It had to make a lot of students nervous. But if people feel safe to speak up and make the right decision based on their values, they're far more willing to experiment or make a decision like that when plans shift. So oftentimes you have this inertia moving of like, oh, I have to do this. But if you have psychological safety built into your culture, people are willing to push back and ask questions, and unexpected situations become less kind of paralyzing because the team trusts each other and they trust the process overall. So I think you can't rely on removing uncertainty. That's impossible. But it's about equipping people to move forward confidently, even when that next step isn't clear.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratSea.org.
Clear.
Yeah. State and live into your values, normalize ambiguity, and ensure there's psychological safety. Am I capturing those 3 pillars that you've laid out?
I think so.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure our audience captured all the wisdom that you put forward and summarize it. That's what I heard. I just want to make sure I'm accurately mirroring what you're putting out.
So far, so good.
There's so much in that. State and live your values, normalize ambiguity, and create this safety for people to have voice. Yeah.
Precisely.
And if you can do that in an organization, wow, you really accomplished something.
It's just, people, again, like it's so hard to think of an example, how do you prepare others to deal with unexpected, or share some examples of when things went wrong. It's actually would be harder for me to think of something that went 100% as expected. From a career or even this podcast today, like life is just a series of ambiguous choices. And again, that's where values come in, because when you know deeply what matters most, and they change throughout. So you constantly have to check in with yourself and say, okay, well, what do I value the most right now? Is it speed? Is it compensation? Is it work-life balance? Is it learning? Is it all of these things are constantly moving in your own life? But something that someone, it was an executive coach, actually, they gave me this advice, like about every quarter, every 3 months, sit down with yourself and just write down your values. What matters the most to you right now? And we talked earlier a bit about chapters in life. And as you're going through those chapters in your life and in your career, those values will change dramatically. When I was 19 years old and on semester at sea, I did not care about the risk that it was posing to my life. Now, as a mom of 3 and the breadwinner of my family, I might not go skydiving with random people I met at the bar in Cape Town.
No, you didn't do that. You didn't do that.
I might not do that. I might not get off the plane or get off the ship and go and find someone standing at the airport that's willing to drive me to Arusha. Like, but in the moment I was prioritizing adventure. That was my value, learning, growth. And I think, again, the only constant is change. And when you're trying to hold on to something that is moving, it just is like sand. You can't hold on to it. So just knowing that ambiguity is a part of life, like adaptability is the only way. Anyway, I could keep going on and on and on, but
no, I love it because, this is one of those things where I always, at the very least, chuckle inside, if not a little bit outside, when people say, can we stop changing the structure of the organization? And I chuckle inside because I want to respect what they're really asking, which is, how can I feel safe amidst the change? But of course, you can't stop changing the structure of an organization because everything around it is always changing. And so to just go to what Laura shared, the organization's going to change, our work's going to change, and really going back to these core fundamentals that she laid out. Know your values, embrace ambiguity, normalize ambiguity, and make sure people are respected and feel like they have a place in their voice. I mean, that's awesome. And given that we're also just talking about interpersonal relationships, I think this is a great transition point to the quote that I chose for you today, Laura. It comes from a book. It's actually a collection by young Pueblo. The book, for anybody out there, is called Clarity and Connection. And I think that his way of writing certainly has captured my attention, my mind, and my heart. And I wanted to share this with you and get your thoughts on it. It goes like this. Your relationships improve drastically, and the tension in your mind decreases significantly when you can simply accept people for who they are instead of fixating on how they should change in order to be more like you.
I love this quote. I love young Pueblo. In fact, I was reading a previous book of his at a team meeting recently, and one of my teammates said, "Oh, Diego, he was my next door neighbor in college." I was like, oh, "Okay,
wow, okay."
So anyway, he actually, his work has actually gotten me through some really like challenging lifetimes. I think he's a really beautiful modern poet and leader. I hadn't heard this quote, and what it reminded me of was maybe the master class of acceptance that comes with living abroad. I spent, the better part of a decade living abroad, and then adding that with all the travels, like probably 18 to 20 years of my life living outside of the country that I was born in, spending time outside. And it's really hard to cling to expectations when it's different, when everything around you is different from what you're used to. And during that time for me, what I gained was a profound appreciation for ideological diversity, right? And when you are immersed in these different cultures, you learn that there are more ways to see the world than the one way that you were taught to see the world. And you start, I learned about the tall poppy syndrome, for example, when I lived in London. It's not something that our American exceptionalism teaches us. But the concept is you don't want to be the tall poppy. You really want to, it's more communal minded. You want to fit in. Um, and if you get too high, people will chop you down. And I think what you learn is not just to tolerate different perspectives, but to actively seek them out, right? Because for me in community work, open-mindedness and curiosity are the assets. Like that's in my tool belt. Um, you have to be able to understand different motivations, and you have to be able to understand different perspectives to bring people together and to do what I was describing earlier, to move them together towards something that they couldn't do alone. And at first, I will tell you, it can be really frustrating being abroad and living abroad and embracing other perspectives, because you notice all the things that they should do. You know,
Right.
you should do it this way. Why don't you do it this way? Habits and manners and the way of thinking, and like wishing people would be more like you, and that is exhausting. It's just
And
constant.
futile.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But over time, you learn that friction disappears completely. Like this quote, when you stop expecting people to fit your mold, and instead you get curious and you start observing and appreciating and accepting those differences. And you notice that things work differently, and sometimes they work even better. Shocking. People have their own rhythms and their own priorities, and that you're insistent on change just it doesn't improve anything. It just increases stress. So I think that my overall reflection is that adaptive mindset. You realize relationships thrive when people meet where they are, not where you want them to be. And that tension disappears because you're not constantly battling reality, and your connections can deepen because people feel respected and they feel understood.
Yeah, I love it. So here underlies in my mind some of the paradox in our world of somewhat divisiveness and the discourse of difference, is that there is this paradox for us that we fear the other, so we want them to change and be like us. But if we overcome that fear and embrace the other as they are, we actually become more comfortable in who we are. There's
Yes,
a profound paradox in this.
I could not agree more. It's not about giving up your standards or changing. It's about letting go of control. It's about embracing the richness of human diversity and letting those things be true at the same time. Not saying one is better or worse, but just they both are. Um, and I do think that in all my work with community, like I am long on human. That might not be a popular opinion these days, but our quirks and our sharp edges and our things that people think are weird, you know, that's what makes humans beautiful and chaotic and, fallible, but alive and beautiful. And I think there's something similar. I could be going off track here, but there's something similar in Japanese culture. There's a saying. It's called mono no aware, and it means um, having empathy for ephemera. Basically, that humans are beautiful. Life is beautiful precisely because it's temporary, precisely because it's going to end. And I learned that during cherry blossom season. We were there again. Shout out semester at sea. We ended up at 2 ports in Japan because we did not stop in our other Asia trips. But that actually the imperfection, the fact the cherry blossoms are going to fall and die, is what makes that season so precious. And being able to embrace and have empathy for the fact that life is so temporary, chapters are so short, um, makes it that much more beautiful. And I think there's something there again with this quote that, humans are imperfect, and that's what makes us so wonderful.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a wonderful connection. The ephemeral nature of life, should focus us more on embracing the diversity, should focus us more as it grounds us in doing so, in who we are. I love it. Laura, this has been brilliant. If we could just come to a conclusion with that one piece of advice that you would have for anybody early in their careers, thinking about how should I approach my life? How should I value my education, my energy, my perhaps idealism, my drive, but not having the career yet, just really early on. What's that one thing you would say to them right now?
Well, first of all, I'd say don't follow the rules, because I'm going to give you two things. Be willing to break rules.
Perfect.
There's one piece of advice I got that's just pithy and short, which is when you're listening, listen to understand, not to be understood. That will change the way you move through life. When you truly listen to understand what the other person is saying. So with curiosity, not to formulate what your response is going to be. So that's the short one. The longer one, I think, is very cliche based on everything that we've been talking about. But the sooner you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, the better leader you will become, the more successful you will become, because being uncomfortable is where learning happens. And plans are always going to go sideways. And I think I see junior managers and junior leaders thinking that their job is to control. That is not your job. That's a fool's errand. It's to navigate your team through uncertainty with courage and compassion and curiosity. That 70% rule, get used to moving forward, even when you don't feel like you have all of the data. Listening to your team and learning as you go. But leadership is not about having answers. It's about staying grounded and flexible, knowing your values, and helping others do the same.
I'm so glad you said both, because they are so interdependent with each other. If you listen to understand, you can navigate through those uncertain moments so much better. Awesome ending. Exclamation point. Laura, thank you so much for your time. I hope you heal quickly.
I know. I'm ready for a big weekend.
The Kleenex, the Ricola, the tea are all at hand.
It's true. I don't know. Getting sick in the beginning of the school year is probably the most expected thing that's happened to me in a while. So that's
yes,
fine.
Indeed. Yeah. With all the other ones.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Thanks so much.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.